welcome today to our presentation on how does self-esteem affect your life. So we are lucky today to be joined by Jo Conrad. She's going to do a presentation for us. We're so excited. So thanks everybody for hanging in there through the technical difficulties of this morning. She is with TLC. My name is again Lisa Honka, and I have a company called Your Key to Senior Living Options, and I'll tell you more about me later. But Bonnie, why don't you introduce TLC and our guest today, Jo Conrad.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks so much for sticking with us today. That was just, we couldn't avoid all that, but I'm glad to see all of you here. And I'm with TLC Services. We're an organization that's a nonprofit, and we have about 20 volunteers. They're retired, licensed and insured social workers, mental health counselors, marriage and family therapists, and psychologists. And we do training, we do support groups, we do presentations like this one, and we do one-on-one counseling. We do all of this free of charge, and we ask for for donations. And I have the pleasure of introducing Jo Conrad. I'll say your name right, Jo. She is one of our mental health counselors, and she's been doing this for a very long time. I've heard her talk about self-esteem before, and I could just listen to her all day. She has a lot to say about it. So I will turn it over to you, Jo.
I'm going to talk today about self-esteem. In the late 60s, I became involved in a meeting that was happening once a week. And I went to the meeting, and it was the Nathaniel Branden Institute. And they talked about all different kinds of self-esteem, and there's a tremendous amount of information out there. And so I had to pick and choose today because they don't have a whole lot of time. And especially when we had problems, I'm cut short. So I want to talk about some of the aspects of self-esteem that are very important, that have to be there. I'll do it that way. And then after that, when I came here to live 16 years ago, I got involved in a philosophy group. And they had a meeting every week, and they had a speaker, and then they passed around the microphone, and we could ask questions or we could comment. And so the leader of the group asked me to stay behind at one point in time after the meeting, and I did. And he asked me if I'd like to give a talk, if I could be the speaker for 1 week. I said, wow, I don't know exactly what I'd do. I said, you know, I could compare Nathaniel Branden's self-esteem with Ayn Rand's objectivism, her philosophy, because all of his comments, his books, he's written many books, and they were based originally on objectivism, which is Ayn Rand's philosophy. And so I asked if I could do that, and so he said fine, and I did. And after it was over, sometimes people come up to speak with you, you know, and somebody came up and said to me, why don't you go to the Lifelong Learning College and give a class on self-esteem? And I had never thought of that. So I did. I went there, and they said to give them some kind of an outline, and I did. And so I taught for the self-esteem class lasted 6 weeks. So, and when it was over, there were people who were asking for it, and so I did another 6 weeks. Then after that was over, it was really funny because they came to me and they said, we'd like you to do it again, but we'd like you to change the name. And I said, what, self-esteem? And they said, yeah, because there are some complaints. And I said, what are they? And they said, well, it seems that, you know, people don't like those words, self-esteem, and they don't want anybody to know that they're coming to you to try to figure out if they have any or not. And so I thought that was so funny. I couldn't think of what to call self-esteem if you didn't call it self-esteem. And so the college closed soon after that. So I never did another class. But I think that that we can explore it if we have a really simple definition. And self-esteem is the reputation you get with yourself. That's simple. And where does it come from? All over the place. And we don't have enough time to talk about all of the places that it comes from. But it comes from parents. It comes from relatives. It comes from spiritual leaders. It comes from teachers. It comes from friends, other friends. Self-esteem, it has to be gained and then maintained. And if I were explaining it to somebody, I would say that's one of the most important concepts. You can lose it. You can lose it quickly. And so you have to be aware of it. So we'll talk about some of the things that it entails. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of my clients. They've given me permission to do that without mentioning their names, and I wouldn't do that. And I have a couple of examples from like 40 years ago, you know, of people in a different state, but just a snippet of information so that so that you can understand what I'm talking about. It depends a lot about how we were treated as children, what we were told as children over and over. You know, from our parents and our neighbors and everyone. And we have a lot of beliefs that are unconscious because they come from that period of time when we couldn't figure it out. We just didn't have the brain power, didn't have the maturity. When you're 5 years old, it's pretty hard to figure something out, you know, and especially when somebody who is the adult who is taking care of you tells you something, that sticks. And it can be very, very sticky. It can remain no matter how old we get. So some of the material that we need in order to explore our self-esteem is actually unconscious, unfortunately. A really, really good example of that would be when I had a private practice, a gentleman came in one day and he said, "I need you to help my daughter." And I said, "What's wrong?" And he said, "I don't know, but she hasn't left the house in 3 years." And I said, "Well, she has a phobia. She has agoraphobia then." He said, "The only problem is she can't come here because she can't leave the house. So you'll have to go to her." And I said, "Fine, I would." And I did. Now, the only thing she could tell me was that 3 years before, she was in an automobile. She was in a car. She was going to the store and going to try to buy Neapolitan ice cream, which was 3 flavors. And she used to eat it as a child. She used to love Neapolitan ice cream. On the way to the store, she had a major panic attack and pulled over to the side of the road. She thought she was having a heart attack because that's how it felt. And so she pulled over to the side of the road, and then she came back home, and she'd never left her house since. And so you can't talk somebody out of a phobia. At least I can't. I'll say it that way. And so I used hypnosis, and I used it several times. And it took, I went over to her house for several times a week for 2 weeks. And just to get her to the front door, you know, if you opened the door, she'd start to panic, you know. And so finally she got out onto the porch, and I held her hand. And I said, "Can you walk down the sidewalk?" And she said, "Yes." And we walked down the sidewalk. We walked over to a crossroad. When she got to the crossroad, she started to hyperventilate and cry. And I said, "Just stay here and talk to me. Just talk to me." She said, "Oh my God." She said, I know something happened here. She said, "When I was a child, I lived in the same neighborhood. And one day, I was on my bike and I was going to cross this road when a car came by. And the man in the car jumped out, exposed himself to me and tried to get me in the car." And she said, "And I lived in the same neighborhood, so I dropped my bike and I ran." And so we went back to her house and sat down. And I said, "Is there any connection between what you were doing when this started and that event?" She said, "Nothing but Neapolitan ice cream." And I said, "Well, that could be it." I said, well, I'll accept that. That would be perfectly fine. Within 2 weeks after that, she was driving. She was driving again. You see, that event was not available for her, and she couldn't talk about it, and she didn't know that she was frightened. And the subconscious and the unconscious mind, they try to protect us. So see, she was on her way to the store to get Neapolitan ice cream, just like she did when she was little, and she had this panic attack. And the unconscious kept her in the house to keep her safe because the unconscious doesn't know time. And so she was. That's a really good example of things that can happen in our childhood, and that sometimes we don't remember at all. So we believe what we think, and if our thinking is fallacious, it doesn't make any difference because we believe what we think. And many of our childhood memories are involved in that. The most dramatic, one of the most dramatic examples I know of is that when Elaine and I were doing Way to Go, that's WEIGH for anyone who doesn't know what the group does, and we deal with people who are overweight, binge eaters, that type of thing. When we were doing it, I was doing the hypnosis. And I did I told everyone to close their eyes. There were probably 18 people in the room. They were at a big long table. And they all closed their eyes, and I took them. I said, now I'm going to have you imagine something. I want you to imagine that you're standing at the top of 5 stairs. And I said, you're going to step down. I'm going to guide you. And on each step, I'll give you an affirmation that you can say quietly in your mind. And these affirmations were things like, I am in charge of my food. I have everything I need. This isn't very difficult at all, whatever it might be. And so I was doing the hypnosis, and all of a sudden, I looked at her and she was crying. Her eyes were closed, but there were tears streaming down her face. And she was quietly sobbing. And when it was over, when the group was over, she said she'd like to see me personally, just alone. And I said, okay. So she came in and she said, I'm 63 years old. And when I was 5 years old, I was standing at the top of a flight of stairs because we lived in Manhattan and we had 3 floors to our house. It was huge. And a man came up behind me, put his hand over my mouth, pulled me into a room. And I think he sexually abused me for years. I can't remember all of it, but it was terrible. And it went on and on. And one time my mother came in the room while it was happening. And she backed out and closed the door. So she said it was, so what we actually did was we did one-on-one counseling for several months to try to, she said so many things to settle. And she had had amnesia all these years. She just did not remember. And that jogged her memory and it came back. And she lost 20 pounds and she got married. So it really is a wonderful story, because it worked really well. But sometimes we just don't know what's in there and what's driving us to do what we do. And it started in our childhood. I want to say that emotions play a big part in our self-esteem. Emotions do. Emotions are not tools of cognition. Now, that does not mean that if you make a choice, let's say you're going to buy a house, okay, and there are a lot of emotions involved. Do you like it? Is it wonderful? Is it better than any house you've ever seen? Yes, but if the emotions take over, and you're not really thinking, and we need to think or not to think, that is the question. And so when the emotions take over, a good example of that would be when I was in a clinic, they asked me to do an anger management class. And people would sign up from the community. And I had 10 angry men. That's what I ended up with. And there was never a better example of emotions are not tools of cognition. They were in trouble all the time. If somebody said something they didn't like, they punched them out. They beat up their wives. They smacked their kids. They didn't think. They didn't know how. And so we spent, I think that was a 10-week clinic that they called it. And we spent 10 weeks and talking about anger and how to manage it and what it means and where did you learn how to manage it that way. And so we don't want a lot of emotions to overcome our logic and our knowledge when we're trying to build our self-esteem. Self-esteem always has a hierarchy of values. And our hierarchy of values changes. Sure it does. If the biggest value on it is, let's say on your hierarchy, is let's say it's your productive work, and then let's say you get sick, and it's pretty serious, then that's going to be the highest item on your hierarchy, getting better, getting well. So it changes from time to time, but basically it's pretty stable, and it's very, very important. You know, when I would give little talks in Way to Go, I would often ask people, write down 5 of your highest values. Boy, they had trouble. Because, see, I wanted to see if losing weight was anywhere close to the top. Because if it wasn't, and it was down at the bottom, then, then it wasn't going to work. And so many, many years ago, it's hard to get at your values, you know. What do you think of most? What's in your mind most? I had a girl who had 3 children, and she was a client. And she came in because her children had been taken away from her and given to her dysfunctional husband, and he was better off than her. So what happened is that she came in for counseling. And one day when she came in, I said, will you write down your hierarchy of values? Just write them down. And I explained to her what I wanted. She said, I don't have to write them down. I know what's the highest. My kids. And I said, no, they aren't. And she said, well, how would you know? And I said, well, the way I'd know is that when you come in for a session, you immediately start talking to me about the bar you go to after work and how many men you've picked up, and going on dates with them and what you're going to wear the next time. And if they have a wife, it's even more of a challenge. That's at the top of your hierarchy of values. And so, what do you think about the most? You know, what's in your mind the most? The most dramatic, I think, case that I've ever seen. It was like 2 years ago, something like that. And we had a girl that came into Way to Go. And then after the 10 weeks were over, she asked if she could see me one-on-one. And I said, sure. This is hard to believe what I'm going to say. To date, she has lost 136 pounds, and she is going to lose another 60. And I said to her, I said, it's wonderful. She gave me her schedule and what she does, and she's an entirely different person. Entirely different. I said, name just one thing that was that boosted your self-esteem more than anything else. She said, I could tie my shoes. And I said, really? She said, do you know what kind of a problem that is if you can't tie your shoes? She said, I would be in a grocery store and my shoe would come untied. And I knew I was going to fall if I didn't. I'd have to ask a stranger to tie my shoes. So she said, I was ecstatic when that happened. Now, See, because of that weight loss, her whole life changed. Every bit of it. Her relationships with people changed. Her idea of herself. There's something that I do with every client that I see, and that's I ask them if uh, if they're meditating, and if they're not meditating, I ask them if they will, because it's extremely important. Then if they can't do it by themselves, there are so many people online that will help with guided meditation, and just so many. And so she's a meditator, and she talked to me. She said, and now I live in the now. I live in the present moment. She said, and it's wonderful. It's wonderful. See, this has to do with self-esteem too. If you learn to meditate and you do it well, and you get rid of your monkey mind, and you do it pretty well, and you stay in the present moment for 15 or 20 minutes, it's very helpful if you're a binge eater and after supper you want to eat something. You're trying to figure out what to eat. You're not hungry. You just want to eat something. It's very helpful if you're really good at meditation, because you can let that thought go. You can let it. It's very hard to get rid of, because you're thinking, oh, I know what's in the food. There's a chocolate cake in the refrigerator. I'm going to go get it. And then I'm going to have this, and I'm going to have that, and whatever. And if you can just be quiet and live in the now, just for any period of time, that goes away. And you know what? We're really, really good at what we do over and over, what we practice. Really, really good at what we practice. And so if we practice overeating, we'll become very good at that. If we practice letting that go whenever it comes, and you do it enough times, then you know exactly how to do it. I've done it. I know how to do it. I know that it works. It does. And so I would suggest that. I would suggest meditation to anybody. Well, there's good self-esteem that has to be gained and maintained, but there's bad self-esteem. So a client came in a couple of weeks ago and said, I'm so angry with my brother-in-law. And I said, why? And she said, because he's got such a big ego. It's huge. I said, explain big ego to me. And she said, well, he comes over and he talks about, oh my word, my house is so big, I need so much help. Well, I shouldn't have bought such a big house. I've lost a little bit of money, but I have so much that it's not going to make any difference about the pandemic when the pandemic's here. And if it weren't for all my education, I stopped her and I said, you're talking about somebody with really poor self-esteem. And she said, I don't get it. And I said, if you have very good self-esteem, you don't have to tell anybody. You don't have to brag at all. I said, there's a saying. The Buddhists say, nobody notices the enlightened man because he does not notice himself. And I said, if you're really smart, or you're really pretty, or you're really rich, other people will know. They'll catch on. They know. And you see, he was getting self-esteem from somebody else. And sometimes people do that. Their self-esteem depends on somebody else and what they think and what they say about us. And then we're in trouble. If our self-esteem, I have had several men who have come in and eventually talk about all of their conquests with women, how women adore them, how good they are in bed. And I say to them, you don't find your self-esteem in somebody else's bed, you take it there. Because people with really good self-esteem and who are stable are attracted to other people who have good self-esteem and who are stable. Then they can share. Otherwise, you can't share. It just doesn't work. And people with poor self-esteem have a lot of anxiety. They're always afraid that somebody's going to find out. I don't know what, but somebody's going to find out that they're not as good as they think they are. They're not as attractive as they think they are, or whatever. But they constantly live with a low grade or high grade of anxiety. And anxiety is the motor, I think, of neurosis. I think anxiety is the motor of neurosis. It keeps it going. It keeps it going off forever. And so low self-esteem is hard to live with. Can it be gained if it's low? Sure, sure, sure it can. Because it's not low all over. You know, you can have low self-esteem in one area and really good self-esteem in another area. I mean, it's possible. But the areas in which we have low self-esteem, we have to build it then. We have to first acknowledge which area is that. You have to name it. And that's how I help people start. In which areas are you sure of yourself? And which areas are difficult for you, are much harder than you? And see, one of the things that's difficult in way to go, you know, you can hide poor self-esteem for a while, but there's no such thing as thinking you're way overweight and having good self-esteem. So the thing is that weight is one of the areas in which you wear your addiction. Overeating is an addiction, just like any other addiction. And so, but this is the one that when you walk into a room and you're way, way overweight, everybody knows what you've been doing. I mean, everybody knows that. And it's embarrassing. And that's where people that often, when I talk to them about their low self-esteem and going into a room with other people, they start mind reading. And they do it. They just really believe it because we believe what we think. And they they walk into a room and they'll say, and I know what they thought. I know what everybody thought. They were thinking I'm fat. That's it. They didn't like, and I'd say to them, did somebody say that to you? No, they didn't say it, but I know that. They mind read. They make it worse. And so it's and we do that anyway. We have a tendency to do that anyway in other areas, not just that area, but it's done a lot in that area. So the point is that that you can gain it and you can maintain it, but you have to be really, really aware of it. And what I find is that people are not aware of their thinking. They're not aware of what they're thinking. And especially people who are depressed, you know, people who are depressed, it's very difficult for them to know how they're contributing to that depression. So I always ask, be ultra aware of what you're thinking because of the fact that I live alone. See, I can talk out loud and there's nobody to think I'm crazy. I can say everything I want to say right out loud. And when I do that, when I say my thoughts out loud, I objectify them. It's like writing them down. People keep journals, right? Well, I don't like to do that. And so I talk it through. And especially if I feel depressed. Because when people come in and I say, what kind of a week have you had? Well, I was depressed all day Wednesday. And I say, all day? Really? You didn't come out of it at all? Did you know that you can change your thinking? You can change your thinking. I'm in the process of reading a really, really good book on changing your thinking. And I think it was Wayne Dyer who always said, change your thinking, you change your life. And it's true. It's true. And remember, whatever you keep doing over and over, you really get good at. So a lady came in one day and she said that she was very depressed. She'd been depressed for 5 years. And I said, before I even thought, I said, well, then you must be pretty good at it. And she wasn't real happy with that. But I said, you know, if you practice this kind of thinking over and over, then obviously you're going to believe it's true because what we think, we believe. And so I don't think I have a whole lot more to say about self-esteem. If you have the hierarchy of values, you know your hierarchy of values. and you know, you're aware that your self-esteem is low, and you're aware of where it's low, you can work on that. Because as I said, I've seen miracles. I mean, I saw a spontaneous recovery a couple of months ago, and there's nothing like it. I never thought I'd ever see another one. I saw one before that, and the, that that just your self-esteem explodes when you have spontaneous recovery. My husband, who died 22 years ago, was a golfer, and he golfed all the time. And his hands broke out with psoriasis, just on his hands. And so he'd wear white gloves when he golfed, and he'd come in, his hands were all bloody. And he went to one doctor after another, after another, after another, and nobody could do anything for him. They had no idea how to help him. Nothing worked. And so I was sitting there one day, and it was winter, and I said, Chuck, let me hypnotize you. He said, oh my God, that's BS. I said, well, yeah, it's BS, but it works. And so I said, but you can't hypnotize me. And I said, well, when people say that, you can't. Because if you don't want to be hypnotized, all hypnosis is self-hypnosis, so you can't be hypnotized then. Why don't you just try? Okay, so I said, close your eyes. And he did, and I hypnotized him. And what I said in essence was, for whatever reason this disease came to you, that's in the past. And the past is past. You don't have to have it anymore. You have whatever it takes to get rid of it. So he came out of it. It took 15 minutes. So he came out of it, and he said, well, you know, I don't feel any different. I just feel like I was sitting here with my eyes shut. And I said, well, that's what you were doing, but we were talking to the unconscious. And it may work. He said, well, but it's winter, you know, and it's not as bad in winter. Wait till summer comes. It's going to be worse. And I said, is that a plan? And he said, well, no. And I said, well, it sounds like one to me. So within a week, it was gone. It was just little red spots. It was gone. And then within 2 weeks, there was no sign of it. His doctor asked him what on earth he did to get rid of it. And Chuck said, oh, I don't know. I think it just went away by itself. See, he wasn't going to tell him that I had any, that he was hypnotized. And it was a spontaneous recovery. Within a week, it was gone. He had it for 20 years. And within a week, it was gone. And you know what? He lived quite a while after that. But it never came back. And that's because he wanted it so badly. He wanted to be rid of it so badly that he did whatever he did. I don't know what it was, but whatever he did, he did. And inside his body and brain. And he actually got rid of it. And I've seen 2 spontaneous recoveries now. There's nothing as exciting as that. And when each time that happened, but also when people improve, and when their self-esteem improves, I give them an instruction, and I'm really serious about it. And I tell them, please give yourself credit. If you make a little bit of progress, always give yourself credit. And a couple came in and they were having a lot of trouble, and then they were really doing well, and she opened her mouth and said to me, if it hadn't been for you, and I said, no. I said, we suggested some alternatives, and you did all the work. Take the credit. You don't have to work on my self-esteem. I'm very aware of it, and I'll work on it myself. Work on your own self-esteem. Always give yourself credit when you make progress. Always, even the tiniest bit, the littlest bit of progress. And then your self-esteem will climb. I would like to do something. I would like to read a poem for you that I found. It's over 50 years old. And it was when I was studying self-esteem at the very beginning. And then after I read the poem, and I was surprised. I didn't even remember that I wrote it. And after I read the poem, then I'd like to take some questions. Um, it's called a story. Tell me a story with characters who possess all the strength that they must have to do all the things that a man could do if he were made with a mind that was competent and unafraid. Tell me a story that tells of success, whereby people who try do obtain happiness, do succeed, reaping all of the benefits of a mind ruled by logic and not just by love. Tell me a story and state at the start that the mind of the hero, and not just his heart, is his tool of cognition, and if it's used right, he will be efficacious. He'll win every fight. Don't tell me a story of men you know well, who because of poor judgment lived lives made in hell, paying penance to ghosts manufactured by them, or suspended in limbo, a place without a end. Don't tell me endurance will strengthen your will, while the others around you stand waiting to kill all your confidence after they've picked from your mind your ideas which flourish, while you're left behind to sit wondering now, with your life nearly done, while your trust freely given includes everyone. No, tell me a story that ends with a sign that good judgment and truth takes a competent mind, but it's not automatic. It takes a long time. Please tell me a story like that. So I'll end with the poem, and I'll be glad to take some questions if you have any. Anybody has any?
Wow, thank you so much for that. That was beautiful. So, Joe, we have a couple questions. I wanted to ask you, how is this virus affecting self-esteem?
I'll tell you how it affects my self-esteem, and we can extrapolate from there. When I knew that we were going to be quarantined, and maybe quarantined for a year or two, my family is very far away. I do not have a pet. I don't have a significant other. I knew I was going to be alone. I called friends, and I got in contact with a lot of people, and I said, how can we communicate during this pandemic since we can't see each other? And a lot of people said by email, some said by phone. So I get telephone calls and emails every day. I took all my clients and I spread them out throughout the week. 2 on one day, 1 on the next day, 2 on the next day, another 1 on the next day, whatever. So that every day I would have productive work, because there's nothing that builds self-esteem better than productive work. And so that's really important. There are people that I walk with, and you can walk 10 feet away from somebody with a mask on, but we can still talk. And so being active, that kind of activity with other people, has kept my self-esteem high. Now, I have a few clients that they were solitary people. They didn't have any friends, and or didn't have many, and didn't want very many activities. They pretty much lived alone, but they're doing very well. They're doing better than I would do if I had to stay alone all the time and had no contact with other people. So that's how I've done it.
Well, thank you. And do you have any tips on gaining self-esteem during this pandemic besides that? Do you have any tips on how people can gain self-esteem if they're feeling low?
Right. See, if they're really isolated and they're not with other people, they can definitely gain self-esteem through reading. See, if they're extremely aware of what they're thinking, then and you can change that. If when I start to worry about my children who are far away, and my daughter works with autistic children and she's going back to school soon. When I start thinking of that, I say out loud, horror story, and then I stop. I absolutely stop it. I stop the thinking. And what you're thinking is so vitally important. And I've had people say to me, but it takes a lot of work to stop negative thinking. And I said, well, yeah, it does. Anything worthwhile takes a lot of work. And you also have to be very, very careful during the pandemic that if you're losing self-esteem in an area, do something to raise it. See if you can do something to raise it. But reading is a really good. It's something that you can do alone, and that gives you more information. And it's like going to school. There's a tremendous amount of stuff on the internet, just an awful lot of things, especially Abraham. You know, you can listen to Esther Hicks talk forever. And so I turn on Wayne Dyer and Eckhart Tolle and Joe Dispenza every day, and listen to them talk for 15 or 20 minutes. And that can, you have to work at it, because we're not, I don't go into restaurants, and I don't go to places where there are, groups of people or anything like that, that I don't know. And so you have to come up with other things. But if you don't, then the alternative is not good, because you could really lose your self-esteem. It's hard to build that up.
Wow, well, thank you for that information. So we have about 2 more minutes. I want to ask you one more question real quick, and then we will end with Bonnie's presentation again on TLC. So if someone's self-esteem improves, that affects the family, doesn't it? And their relationships.
Yes. Oh, my word. Yes. Very quickly, I had a woman who came to me for anxiety. And I said, what's the anxiety about? She was taking 4 Xanax a day, which is dopey. And she said, I'm living with my husband and my adult daughter. And she said, and they're driving me crazy, because I keep telling them, you have to do this and you've got to do that. This isn't done. And why don't you do that? And it's always fighting. And so she said, I've got to do something about it. I have to do something about them. And so she talked nonstop for 20 minutes. I didn't say anything. And she got all done, and she said, okay, she said, what should I do? Angry. I said, shut up. And she said, shut up? That doesn't sound very professional. I said, well, look, you're constantly telling them what to do. Take a vacation. For 1 week, don't tell anybody what to do. Just be quiet. Now I'm going to hypnotize you, and we're going to put it on your phone. We're going to record it. It's only 10 minutes long. I want you to use it 3 times a day. You can learn not to be anxious. You learn to be anxious. You can learn not to. So she came back next week, and she said, I said, what happened? She said, well, I went home, and they were waiting for me, and they said, what did she say? And she said, she told me to shut up. And they clapped. And so she said that during that week she did. She was just very quiet. She said, on Wednesday, my husband came in with a great big bouquet of flowers. And she said, my daughter cleaned up her room. She hung up her clothes on. She said, I didn't know that she knew what hangers were for. She said she cleaned everything up. It was wonderful. It was wonderful. It changed the dynamics in the family. She still had to stay. She had a lot of issues. But those dynamics changed in a week.
Mm. That's a great story. That's a great story. Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing your words of wisdom with us. We really appreciate it. You are so knowledgeable, and your clients have been very lucky to have you. You have a great spirit. So thank you for sharing this hour with us. Bonnie, do you want to tell us a little bit more again about TLC and how people can get in touch with your group?
We just want you to know about our website. We have lots of resources there. Take a look, and we have videos. We have a YouTube button that you can press on the button, and you can see our whole channel of videos that we've done with Your Key to Senior Living and a few others. And please do let us know if there's something you need in terms of one-on-one counseling. We're here for you for that. We also request donations, and there's a donate button right on our website. So thank you again for being with us today.
And again, I'm Lisa Honka, and my company is called Your Key to Senior Living Options. I help seniors find independent assisted memory care communities or resources in the area to help them stay safe in their home. My services are completely complimentary to families, and I've helped over 1,000 families in the last 4 years that I've had my company, and I've been doing this for 10 years, so I'm very blessed. I think the next slide shows our next coming presentations. So I'm going to be doing one on August 19th, and it is going to be at 10 o'clock, so a little bit time difference. And it's when is it time to consider assisted living communities. So it kind of goes through the whole gamut of when should you be talking about this, and what are the perhaps medical issues that may be coming along that make you think about this. And then we're going to have a great presentation by Pat Hayes, which I'm really excited about. My time, your time, and our time, because now we're all spending so much more time with our spouse. And how do we get through this? So this will be very interesting. I'm looking forward to hearing this presentation by Pat on August 26th at 11. So certainly share this with your friends. Sorry about the technical difficulties this morning, but I'm glad everybody stuck with us and were able to connect with us. It was great to see everybody again, and we're learning so much through TLC. So kudos to you guys for teaching us and getting us smarter and on our mental health journey. So thank you. Have a great week, everybody.